Let's talk about January 6th. As most Americans, most people around the world have a really narrow understanding of what unfolded on that day. We do know that there have been thousands of Americans rounded up, persecuted by authorities. We now know another 1,000 or so arrests are coming down the pike. We're hearing this from authorities that another round of arrests are coming. Over 14,000 hours of videotaped footage has been withheld from the American people, so they don't get to see what actually happened that day. Why did this not come out during the January 6th hearings? Congressman Matt Gaetz just announced that Republicans are set to release 14,000 hours of video and documents related to January 6th that Americans haven't seen. Watch.
Kevin McCarthy told us he's going to get the evidence out in front of the American people, and that means releasing the 14,000 hours of tapes that have been hidden, that I think would give more full context to that day rather than the cherry-picked moments that the January 6th committee tried to use to inflame and further divide our country. So yes, I do believe that part of this deal is a concession that we are going to get the truth.
Well, Brandon Straka was there that day, had his life turned upside down. He's been pushing for these videos to be released, and he had an unbelievable story, which we can get to later. Brandon's going to be joining us for a deeper dive into his story as part of a Redacted Conversations series. But I wanted to welcome Brandon to the show, who's been out there pushing for transparency on this story, to release these 14,000 hours so that the American people can see what happened on that day. Brandon, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So you were there that day, of course. You had your life turned upside down. As I mentioned, we'll do a deeper dive into what happened to you that day. You were there for a speaking engagement, filming what was unfolding. Didn't even realize that around the other side of the Capitol, there had been some violence. There had been windows broken. You were on the other side. You had your life turned upside down. And I think most Americans, as you even said, later in the day, started to see two very different pictures being painted of what was happening that day. From the American people have had these 14,000 hours of footage withheld from them, so we don't get to see police opening the doors. We don't get to see a whole lot of things. What do you hope we will see in some of this new footage that Congress possibly is about to release? Are you hopeful about this?
Oh, I'm very hopeful. I mean, all I can say is that what I hope is that we have a clearer picture of the truth. I mean, yes, obviously, deep down inside, I would like to believe that the footage that exists that we're about to see will show a different side of things, that will maybe not cast all of the people, the Trump supporters and people who went there to protest in this completely vilified light that they've been in for the last 2 years, myself included. But ultimately, what I want to know is the truth. I mean, if the truth is that Trump supporters and only Trump supporters became incredibly violent and became incredibly destructive, and nobody else was involved and nobody else did anything wrong, then okay, it is what it is. It just feels very hard to believe that that is what the actual truth is, or that's what the story is. I just want a complete picture. I mean, that's it. So, you know, what I'm hopeful is that we'll see police body cam footage. Here's one example. We've been told for 2 years that Trump supporters went to the Capitol and started beating on police officers and acting destructive. And not only that, but we're screaming racial epithets. We're engaged in, you know, just vile and hideous rhetoric revolved around racism. I just find that really hard to believe. Now, I'm not saying that maybe nobody did that, but I've traveled the country for years, going to Trump rallies, doing my own events for conservative communities. I've never met these people that the media describes, and yet they were acting as though this was just a commonplace sort of behavior that day. Well, if it was, then I think that the police body cam footage would show that. And so I'm expecting to see lots and lots of hours of MAGA people engaging in racial slurs, since that's what the media told us. If we don't see that in this footage, that's just one example of something that I think that we should be asking questions about.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And there's so many pieces of eyewitness testimony who watched doors being opened. I mean, these are heavy Capitol doors, big metal doors that were opened from eyewitness testimony from the inside. They were opened and waved for people to come inside. But we don't get to hear that side of the story. And as others have pointed out, almost every angle of that day was filmed. Everything was filmed that day. And why Congress only chose to release and hide 14,000 hours of it, why do you think that is? Why do you think that 14,000 hours has been kept from the American people?
Well, again, I'd like to a certain degree reserve judgment until I've actually seen the footage, but one could certainly imagine that there could be footage within those 14,000 hours that are being withheld that would be destructive to their narrative. And, one thing that I would like to say, as I've been saying in all of my interviews, is people seem to think that, one side of the story is being presented, by the left-wing media, the Democrats, and anybody who wishes to vilify Trump supporters. And then naturally people believe, there must be another side to the story. Well, what I keep trying to tell people is that I don't believe this is a one or two narrative. I think that there's hundreds of thousands, maybe a million or more strangers that came together. Lots and lots of people who did not know each other, but found themselves in this situation where they're all sort of gathered together for a common cause. And then this event breaks out, this riot breaks out. But different people were standing on different sides of the building where different things were happening at different times. This was going on, I think, from 11 a.m. or 12 p.m. to 2 or 3 p.m., all different people on different sides of the building. So everyone's experience is completely different. My experience is very, very different than people who were on the other side of the building an hour before I was there, 2 hours before I was there. And so another thing that I would like to see come forward from this footage is for people to recognize that just because a person was arrested or charged, I think people have this perception that if you were arrested or charged, then that must certainly mean you were standing there when people were breaking windows, or you were screaming like "charge," while people were trying to get inside the Capitol. That was not my experience at all over on the east side of the building at 2:45 p.m. Congress had already cleared, by the way. Congress already cleared by the time I arrived on the east side of the building. When I got there, the two large Columbus doors on the east side were already open, and some people were trying to make their way inside. Now, I go inside the Capitol on January 6th. I never inside. I stood outside for 8 minutes filming. But the thing is, most people don't all they read is that Brandon Straka, the founder of the Walkaway campaign, was arrested for in the deadly insurrection. Well, this conjures up images of me going to the Capitol like a lunatic and a madman, with some intent to cause violence or destruction. So I guess my point is that I'm hopeful that we'll get more perspective, that so many different things were happening in so many different areas. And yes, certainly some violence and destruction. But a lot of people were literally just standing somewhere where they shouldn't have been standing, with very little to indicate to them they shouldn't have been there. Literally people arriving when barricades had already been removed. There were no police officers present and thousands of people around. How is somebody supposed to know that they're not supposed to be standing where they're standing? So there's a lot of things we learn from this footage.
Yeah, and I think it's very instructive, because you have Capitol Police waving individuals through doors. How are they supposed to know they weren't welcomed when you have Capitol Police waving people in? Come on in, and waving. We've seen that footage, waving them in, right? And you have people there who were simply filming, didn't know, and then later found out that they were in trouble because they were standing in a certain spot, that now they're trespassing somehow. And I think you make a great point too, that what the media did was lump everyone together. And so you could have been parked illegally on the street and be lumped in as the same person that stole or went into Nancy Pelosi's office and stole a laptop, right? So you were an insurrectionist if you were there that day, but you weren't even near the building. You were across the mall with a parking ticket, and you were lumped in as the same cohort, right?
I've probably received more media coverage for my misdemeanor case than any other January 6th defendant because of who I am and because of my background. And in all of these, I mean, there are a number of articles that actually refer to me as a convicted insurrectionist in the article. Now, I'm convicted of Class B misdemeanor disorderly conduct. Disorderly conduct misdemeanor. That's what I'm convicted of. But the media has turned that into convicted insurrectionist Brandon Straka ... So, yeah, I mean, I facetiously say sometimes, I mean, you could have thrown a gum wrapper on the ground on Capitol grounds and gotten a ticket for littering, and the media would cover it as, you know, your role in the deadly insurrection. You're going to court for your role in the deadly insurrection. It's absurd, but they're trying to paint everybody with a broad brush because, as we all know, at the end of the day, this is about hatred of Donald Trump and hatred of anybody who would have supported him.
Unbelievable. Yeah, I saw a number of articles that labeled you, Brandon rebuked insurrectionist on January 6th. It's unbelievable. And you were there literally filming for 8 minutes, 40 feet away from the door, never went into the building. And this is what you have to deal with. And thousands of other people, just heartbreaking stories that we've been hearing. Families destroyed as a result of this. And of course, another 1,000 or so arrests appear to be coming. So there's no end in sight for this. What are you hearing from people?
Could I say one more thing?
Yeah, please.
I apologize. Just because you did just say a minute ago, I just stood outside for 8 minutes filming, which is true. You're absolutely right. But there are going to be a number of people who are watching this who will look up my case, and they'll look up the details of my case, and they will read the government's allegations, and they will read the left-wing reporting on my case. And they'll say, wait a minute, you're not telling the whole story. Wait a minute. He went there, engaging and trying to incite people to violence. He went there trying to encourage people. That's what they will read. Fine. But I think the question becomes, why would I do that? And for anybody, I mean, I was a public figure before January 6th for 2.5 years. And one of, honestly, the hardest working and most visible people. I mean, I did dozens of events for years, college campus tours, minority-focused town halls. Walkaway produced our own educational video series. And I do a lot of media because I very much believe in this sort of like boots-on-the-ground approach to spreading the word about Walkaway. So, I mean, I literally did thousands of podcast interviews all the way up to Fox News interviews regularly. People who know me and who have followed me, they know my heart. They know my mission. They know what I'm about. But you would have to believe, in order to believe the government's allegations and in order to believe the media, you would have to believe that while on the way to the Capitol to do my speaking engagement, I spontaneously lost my mind and decided, to hell with it. I'm gonna go try to rile this crowd up and get them to beat up some police officers and get the hell inside that Capitol. Let's F some stuff up. That's what you would have to believe.
Right.
And so, I mean, for anybody who might be watching this who looks up my case and says, well, wait a minute, you're kind of whitewashing that. Okay. But in order to go with your version of events, the one that agrees with the media and the government, you have to bend over backwards to believe I became a completely different person spontaneously and completely lost my mind and filmed myself doing it and then chose to upload my film to Twitter after I did it. That's what you'd have to believe.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's amazing. And it's amazing. But
you did that.
Yeah, you did that. They put out these phony charges, and then he has to then go defend himself. Unfortunately, they can say whatever they want of those charges. And
sure.
Then,
yeah.
And also,
it's ridiculous.
I was going to say, he shot that video on his phone. So he's just holding a phone. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, he wasn't even there with like a professional camera and microphone and everything. He was just literally holding his phone, showing a completely different thing than we were shown. That's it.
So we're going to sit down with Brandon for a deeper dive. We ran out of time today, but we're going to sit down with Brandon to do a deeper dive on a redacted conversation about the really deep stuff on what happened on January 6th, and some of the unbelievable stories. It's really just heartbreaking. So I hope that we see these 14,000 hours of footage released very, very soon. So someone was asking in the chat, like, what's the new piece of this? The new piece is that we're just announcing 14,000 hours of footage is about to be released.
And that what we have seen so far was heavily curated towards a narrative that may or may not be true.
Yeah, by Nancy Pelosi.
And we are owed the truth.
Absolutely, we are. So we'll have more on.
I mean, I'm one of those who clicked on all the articles, you know, after January 6th, like, oh, this crazy guy with horns. Oh, that guy's naked. Oh, he's stealing that. They're crazy. They're bad people.
I mean, there was so much. Yeah,
like,
in Nancy
I ran
Pelosi's
away with
office.
it, and then you realize how much we don't get to know.
Well, and even
and
just
think about
Brandon's
this, like-
point, right? He was on one side of the building, David. I'll just say this. Like, so he was on one side of the building filming, and it was totally peaceful. And the doors opened, like, from the inside out, you know, in one section. And then on the other side, so then he goes back to his hotel and then finds out, like, what was actually happening on the other side of the Capitol. He was on the east side, and it's a huge city block. So, and I've heard it argued, too, that maybe they should be things, you know, people should have been facing different levels of, like, prosecution or whatever based on, like, different quadrants of the square block where they were, because it's a huge, massive area, and where people were was totally different where people around the side of the building were. Anyway, go ahead, David.
Well, I was going to say, like, out of all of the footage that they actually did pull into the J6 committee, like, if I had 14,000 hours of video, I could make it look like a zombie apocalypse. The fact that they took and selectively edit it to fit their narrative is right on. I mean, that's right on point, because you could take and any amount of footage like that and create a narrative. So having it just released that we can just watch it in entirety, it's going to create a completely different narrative, I have a feeling.
Well, we'll see. We'll see how this all goes. Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at Redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to Redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.